A lot of things have changed about this YouTube channel in the last 10 years. There's been the channel name, there's been the branding iconography, there's been the quality of stuff that just gets slapped up here on a nearly daily basis. There is one thing that hasn't changed though, and that is the intro. Hello all you crazy people out there, my name is Dragonite, and it has suddenly been 10 years that I've been doing this. If I recall, there isn't really even a special story about that intro. Suddenly the camera was just rolling and my brother and I had to come up with something to say, and that was like the best we could do. And at some point along the line, the adjective crazy got itself lodged in there, but I don't even know where that came from. Anyway, that's a milestone. Like most deadlines, I wouldn't say I wasn't aware that this date was coming up on the calendar. I've been pretty aware that my channel was about to turn 10 years old basically ever since I made the 9 years video, 4 months late I might add. But at the same time, it didn't actually really hit me that if I wanted to make a video on it, on the actual December 3rd, then I'd really have to actually get my butt in gear and start working on it until like probably a week or two ago. Anyway, you'd probably expect, given how long it's been, that I'd kind of sort of know how any of this works by now, but if you think that, you must be new here. At the same time, it's not like I've ever refrained from opening my mouth about things that I don't know anything about. So instead of doing any, like, fancy life story thing that some people have chosen to do on their channel's big birthdays, I'm just going to explain a little bit how these videos get made. There are two kind of halves to my YouTube channel. There's the game dev half and the game playing half. And as such, there are going to be two videos going up. This video, in case you couldn't guess by the title, is going to be about how the Let's Plays get made. If you want a video on how the game dev stuff gets made, there's another video for that will be linked. So here we go. The first question that needs to be answered when it comes to making one of these Let's Play things, usually, is what game do I feel like playing? The easy, obvious, and somewhat circular answer to this question is, what do I feel like playing? If someone were to walk up to me and ask me, hi, I feel like starting to post gaming videos on the internet, what game should I play? That's probably what I would tell them. But let's face it, there are a ton of games that I'd like to play, and the real question is how you narrow all of your choices down. So I keep a list of all the games currently in my possession that I could see myself doing a Let's Play on at some point before I die. This doesn't count games that I have that I don't really think would be very good Let's Play material. This includes both games that I just own but don't think are very good, and also some games that for whatever reason I like but I don't really think would be very fun to make videos on. The list is categorized by both platform and genre, so that would be things like games on the DS versus on the Nintendo Switch versus on Steam, role-playing games versus adventure games versus visual novels. When the time to spin up a new Let's Play rolls around, the decision of what to do next is usually based on a few things, including but not limited to what have I played recently. I normally don't like to play the same kind of game back-to-back, at least on recording, although there is one series that I have been working on for quite a while that will be coming up, in which this will very, very, very much not be the case. I am not going to say any more on that matter, lest my plans change, again. There's also been what's been on my mind recently. Sometimes someone recommends something to me which I suddenly really have a burning desire to want to give a try. If it felt like Nier Automata kind of came out of the blue on my YouTube channel, that's why. This sometimes also includes new games that are coming out. I don't normally care about chasing trends or whatever for Let's Plays, but if there's a new game coming out that I have been interested in for a long time and also has the potential to drive a lot of traffic, I may or may not actually jump on the opportunity to make something that gets watched by a lot of people. Most of the time this means Epic Battle Fantasy, but also I've been waiting for the next Bravely game pretty much since I finished playing Bravely 2nd. I don't actually know if that's likely to get a lot of views, but you can bet your pants that I'll be sitting down to record that the first chance I get. There's also the question of do I feel like playing something blind or not, which for those of you who are not familiar with the terminology means a game that I've never played before and this is my first time seeing it. Unfortunately, as I've gotten older and I've had less infinite free time on my hands, now most of the time that I spend actually playing games are when I'm on recording. It's kind of a shame, but that's just how life goes sometimes. I don't mind doing blind Let's Plays in the slightest, but I do kind of miss doing the more guided videos sometimes. So once in a while I might just really feel like going back to something that I have played many times over versus something that I've never seen before. On the subject of blind Let's Plays, I know a few people who explicitly dislike them. Chugger Conroy famously doesn't like doing games like that because he thinks his first impression of a game isn't always the one that he wants to put out on the internet for people to see, just in case it changes and becomes fully formed later on, which opinions about games often do. But honestly, I do like seeing my first reaction to something, especially if it's something that I wasn't expecting. And kind of contrary to Chugger Conroy's issue with the whole thing, I do actually like seeing how my impression of a game changes over the course of a first playthrough. So once I've decided on a game, I usually do some preparation for recording a Let's Play, although I don't ever really want to make it feel like a job, so I don't put too much into this. Most of this involves graphic design, creating graphic designs for the thumbnails and that sort of thing. If it's a DS or 3DS game, I'll also build one of those frames to put around the video because, well, I really like the DS and 3DS as consoles, but trying to fit their two screens into a 16:9 aspect ratio, that can be a bit of a challenge to say the least. Although at the same time, making the frames can be kind of fun. In games in which I foresee a lot of player death, and this mostly means platformers, I will also generate a series of death cards. Those little things that pop out of the screen every time I die with a number that counts up so I can see how much I failed at a game by the time I finally beat it. I used to make these by hand, but recently I wrote a program to auto-generate them. This has saved me a fair amount of time. If you are in the business of doing this sort of thing as well, and you would like to use this program yourself, I will have a link to an itch.io page that I set up for it down in the video description. Recording! This is the part that people tend to think of when they think about making Let's Plays. The process of actually recording a game depends a lot on what kind of game it is. Over the years, I've accumulated more video capture equipment than any one person should ever be allowed to have. Game Boy Advance games will be recorded off of a old original blue brick of a DS with a capture unit installed. Loopy's DS capture cards don't actually have audio capture to go along with them, so in order to get the game audio, I also have to plug a 3.5mm audio jack into the headphone port on the DS and plug the other end into my computer, and basically use it as a secondary microphone. DS and 3DS games likewise will be recorded off of a new 3DS XL with another capture unit installed. This one is not Loopy, this one comes from Katsukitty, who is currently out of business. To make a long story short, the console modding business in Japan is not something that you're really allowed to do anymore, so they had to close up shop. This is definitely a shame, although as of my recording this, Loopy is still selling his 3DS capture units as well. Wii and Wii U games will be recorded off of a Wii U, that was a challenging sentence to say, and it will be recorded via an Elgato HD60. I remember when I got this capture card and it felt like the coolest thing ever, and the fact that it's suddenly been superseded by like 3 other cards from Elgato just kind of blows my mind. Nintendo Switch games will also be recorded off of the Elgato, as well as any other console that I may use to make a Let's Play in the future that outputs video over HDMI. Sometimes this also includes other computers, by the way, but that's an entire can of worms that I will not be getting into right now. Also, before anybody asks, yes, I know about emulation. No, I'm not particularly bothered by people who use ROMs of things like DS and Game Boy Advance games. It's not really the piracy element of recording a Let's Play off of an emulator that bothers me, especially since in pretty much all cases I will be ripping the ROMs myself anyway. I just think it feels better to play these games on their actual original hardware, although in some cases where that's not really a realistic possibility, such as the Pokemon ROM hacks that I did a few years ago, I will just use an emulator. Anyway, PC games on the other hand, those can be interesting. Generally, I'll try to record these using OBS with the game audio on one audio track and my voice on another audio track to keep them separated, but because nothing is easy on PC, this doesn't always work. Sometimes OBS will just refuse to recognize the game window or will have other issues recording it, in which case I get to spend hours and hours trying to figure out what's gone wrong. Usually it helps if I can run the game in a window instead of in full screen mode, because OBS is generally better at recognizing programs running in a window than full screen, but this can take a while to get going, and also can sometimes just fall apart for no evident reason in the middle of a recording, and that's always fun. Console games of all stripes, including the handheld ones, can just be so much easier to record, which is one of the reasons I tend to favor those for Let's Plays a little bit. My microphone is a Blue Yeti, which is a pretty common microphone to use for people who are doing things such as this. And I do not own a webcam because, trust me, you do not want to look at my face for any longer than you have to. I have a face for radio, as the expression goes. The actual recording process is pretty straightforward, much more so than the initial setup is. For the most part, I'll just play the game or read the visual novel or do whatever it is that I'm doing and try to string together coherent thoughts for 20 minutes at a time. I keep a notebook containing notes on the games that I'm playing while I'm playing it, and this helps me remember things such as possible video titles that I might want to use for a video, or things like how I should probably try to edit an awkward section, or other notes such as that. If I put the game down at the end of a recording session, I'll often write a note on what I was doing last time so it's easier to pick up the next time around. You may have heard me reference my Let's Play notebook once in a while, and that's all this is. In fact, I'm starting to need a new one because I've been using it for a while and it's starting to run out of blank pages. The length of a game doesn't really bother me, as in like the total playtime in hours. You can probably infer this based on the number of triple-digit series I've done over the years and how I often talk about the episode 100 as kind of a milestone that is to be celebrated rather than something to avoid. I've known people in the past who would refuse to play a game that would go on for longer than 10 videos. That's fine. I just like something that I can sink my teeth into and also possibly a significant chunk of my lifespan. For scheduling purposes though, because I try to actually keep to a schedule instead of just posting things whenever, believe it or not, usually I fail, I will go and estimate the number of videos a series will take. This means looking up the average playtime on a website called How Long to Beat, although if I have played a game before, I may actually subtract a little bit of time from that because I probably know how to get through it reasonably quickly. For role-playing games, and in particular Japanese role-playing games, I will take the average playtime duration and multiply it by about 1.5 to 2. And this will be my estimate for how many videos something is going to take. For example, Xenoblade Chronicles has an average playtime listed of about 70 hours-ish on that website. And if you multiply that by about 1.5, you'll get about 100 to maybe 110 estimated episodes. In my case, it was actually a little bit shorter than that because of the amount of time I cut out dying and stuff, and backtracking and gem crafting and whatever. Whereas for most other games, I will multiply the estimated playtime instead by about 2.5 to 3. For example, Super Mario Galaxy, the main story is estimated about 14 hours, so if you multiply that by 3, you'll get something in the realm of 40 videos, which is more or less what it turned out to be. In that case, it was a little bit less because, like I said, I've played the game before and I know how to get through it reasonably quickly. And again, this is just an estimate. It doesn't really affect whether or not I decide I want to play a game or not. It's just for scheduling purposes and so that I can have a rough idea of how long I'm going to spend dedicating my life to playing this game. Editing! This is pretty straightforward. Unlike the game dev videos, I don't have to really think that much about whether or not every word I say is an effective way to make people understand something. In fact, quite the contrary, if I say something that makes no sense in a Let's Play, it can be fairly humorous, at least to some people apparently. There is still a lot of things such as ums and ers and parts where I spend 5 minutes running back to the nearest Pokemon Center that have to get cut out. This obviously varies by game. JRPGs tend to have a lot of stuff cut out of them. I'm sure you can figure out why. If I die over and over in a platformer, I'll usually cut out the backtracking as to not waste anybody's time. This usually doesn't take too long, and I can usually get through editing a batch of videos at once, although there are certainly some games that feel like they take longer to edit than others. And paradoxically, the more straightforward linear games that don't have a lot of stuff cut out, such as the visual novels, can feel like often that they actually take more time to edit than the more complicated ones like Pokemon or whatever. Probably because I'm just sitting there waiting for something to happen instead of actively kind of participating in the editing process. First, I extract both the game audio and narration from whatever files they have been originally recorded into and run a few filters on them. Nothing fancy, this mostly just means normalizing them so that the loud parts are more or less as loud as all of the other loud parts. This helps it not sound like I'm screaming in one video and barely whispering in another, just because my microphone volume happens to be slightly lower one day than it does the next. I will save both the game audio and the narration to a WAV file, and if I have to, I'll convert the video file from whatever format it was originally recorded into to an MP4, because I just like MP4 video files, and I know that all software that I can use to edit video can handle them. Editing itself is done in either Adobe Premiere Elements 11 or Vegas Pro 15. I want to say Sony Vegas, although I think by the time number 15 rolled around, someone else bought it, and it is no longer owned by Sony. That was one of the best Humble bundles ever, by the way, including the game dev ones. If they ever happen to give away such a thing such as Vegas again for like $20 or whatever it was, definitely jump on it, because it's definitely worth the money. Anyway, more and more lately I've been using Vegas for the Let's Plays since it has a few nice quality of life things that let me work faster. This includes the ability to render more than one video at once, which means I don't have to sit there and babysit it, and I can instead walk away from the computer to do other things, such as like read a book or go eat food or walk my dog or go to sleep, because I often do this overnight for obvious reasons. Before anyone asks, yes, I know Adobe Premiere Pro has a batch export feature. Premiere Elements does not, believe me. With that said, I do find Premiere Elements to be easier to use with certain effects, particularly those which involve multiple video tracks, and involve moving them around and scaling them and cropping them in different ways, which means that I usually use Premiere for things like 3DS games. In Premiere, moving a video around and scaling it and cutting off the sides and keyframing it in different ways is pretty much what you see is what you get. Meanwhile, in Vegas, it's a bit of a mess. At least in the version I have. I don't know if it's been cleaned up since then. Once I edit and render the videos, now it's time to upload them. Haha, just kidding. It's extremely common for stuff that I record to sit in deep storage for months or even in some cases years before I actually upload them. Sometimes this even happens if I don't intend it to. For example, Pokemon Sword kind of went on accidental vacation for most of the summer of 2020 and ended up just sitting around for a long time without me doing anything with it. This will go as far as the entirety of a game being recorded or even edited before Part 1 ever goes up. I could rattle off a ton of examples for this, but to name just a few, Xenoblade Chronicles, about half of that was recorded in the beginning of 2018, a good year before Part 1 ever went up. About the first half of Pokemon Heart Gold was recorded in the end of 2018, which was about probably 10 months before it ever went up. Harvest December, the goofy visual novel that I did not expect to like nearly as much as I did, was recorded somewhere around the beginning of 2017, and I think even the end of 2016. I probably would have posted that one sooner, except then I decided that I wanted to do the months of the year gimmick, and that ended up having to wait a while because December was suddenly 11 months out. The drawbacks of this approach are obvious, especially when I do a blind Let's Play, because I don't really get a chance to respond to comments people leave on the videos until much, much later, if, like, at all. And then when people leave comments on the videos saying things like, hey, in the upcoming boss fight, you should probably equip this piece of armor or whatever, and then it's kind of like, I can't actually do that because this was all recorded a year ago. But honestly, I prefer it this way because it means I can work ahead when the opportunity presents itself, and then if I'm suddenly busy and don't have a chance to play video games for 5 months, then I can just sit on the pile of footage for as long as I really need to, and just work on the backlog for a prolonged period of time. This year, for example, 2020, I've actually not done very much at all by way of recording video games, due to the amount of time the game dev stuff has taken up, and except for the one bit of weirdness over the summer where I was completely distracted, my upload schedule for the Let's Plays hasn't really been affected that much. This also, and this is kind of an unseen benefit of this also makes it a more reasonable practice to be able to record multiple games at once if there just happens to be more than one game that has my interest at a time. It can be a little bit awkward for me if I put a game down for a while and then half a year later I pick it up again and try to remember what I was doing, even though I do have that Let's Play notebook, which is kind of there to mitigate this problem. But aside from that, that sort of thing doesn't really affect the schedule very much, which I definitely like. On that note, you'll probably also see me posting shorter games from time to time. Currently, this means Witch of Ice Kingdom 2, which is a goofy indie RPG Maker game that I just felt like playing one day. In the past, this has been things like Pokemon fan games. Kind of work on the same principle. As much as I like my 80-hour JRPGs that go on for 130 videos, it is nice to work on shorter things once in a while. And play shorter things once in a while. Lately, I've also been posting 2 games at once side by side on alternating days. I used to not like doing this because one would inevitably end up taking the back seat and not be seen for a long time. But now that the routine is more established, that doesn't really happen very often aside from the Gate of Firmament thing. Which is mostly because my sister and I have been too lazy to actually play more of that game. We won't talk about that right now. I'll get back to that eventually. The obvious downside of that is that things now take twice as long to complete, and it doesn't help that I tend to play long games to begin with, so if I decide to, for some reason, play 2 100-hour games at the same time, then it might be a good year and a half, 2 years before you see anything else. That could definitely start to drag out a little bit. I try not to do that, though. So, to wrap things up, the actual uploading and scheduling of a video is pretty straightforward. If you've never uploaded anything to YouTube before, you just kind of click the button and fill in the title and description and all that sort of thing, and tell YouTube when to make it public. The thumbnails that I've used in the past are kind of all over the place. In the past, I've also auto-generated the thumbnails, not too dissimilar from the death cards that I mentioned a while ago. Especially for games that don't have a lot visually going on between episodes, such as the original Bravely games on the 3DS. But over the years, I've gotten somewhat better at picking out still frames and using them as thumbnails to make each one look at least a little bit distinct, so I don't really do that anymore. I have 2 different thumbnail templates that I use, one for some games and the other for other games. The only real difference is the shape that's on the left-hand side of them. One of them is a convex curve, the other is a concave curve. And then I'll modify them slightly to make them look and feel a little bit more in character with the game's visual style as a whole. Generally, I'll try to put the text and graphics and whatever on the left side of the thumbnail instead of the right side, because in the bottom right corner, YouTube will put the little timestamp that tells you how long the video is before you click on it. And if there's anything in that quadrant of the image, it'll kind of get obscured, which is usually not what you want. And to anyone who is making YouTube videos in 2020, I mentioned this in the game dev, how the sausage is made video also. I can't believe I have to say this, but please don't put too much in your thumbnails. Yes, you're allowed to make them 1920 by 1080 HD. No, that doesn't mean you actually should, because they still have to actually be legible at low resolution, because after all, they're going to be shown to most people as actual thumbnails, and not as a full screen, like, movie poster thing. Most people have admittedly figured this out since the early days of custom thumbnails. It's not nearly as, like, Wild West out there as it used to be back in 2013, 2014, but I do still see thumbnails out there that are, in polite terms, a complete mess, covered in small text and whatnot. So once the video is up, now it's time to do it all over again. If anyone happens to be just starting out trying to make Let's Plays, I will say you probably don't want to copy what I do, because I've been doing this for a long time and I'm used to the routine, even if it's kind of a weird and long and indirect routine. Some general advice that I would give for people who are just starting out with this kind of thing, whether that's a Let's Play or a Twitch stream or something, would be to start with a game that you're familiar with. If you're not used to just talking by the seat of your pants and making up stuff to fill dead air, then having a game that you know like the back of your hand and you already have lots of stuff to say about will definitely help. I would also say you probably don't want to start out with a role-playing of any kind, whether that's an Eastern role-playing game or a Western role-playing game, because those do tend to lend themselves to more editing. You can go to places like the Let's Play subreddit for advice, but definitely don't take them as like the word of God or anything, because this is a very free form. It's really an art form in a lot of ways, and you can just kind of do whatever you want as long as you happen to like the finished product. At the end of the day, it doesn't really matter if you talk over dialogue, or if you don't talk over dialogue, or if you read every line of text in the game, or if you just kind of skip through it all, as long as you like how it ends up coming out. Gaming videos on YouTube have become an insanely saturated field over the last 13-ish years, and especially if you're just starting out, making a video that you actually like will absolutely be a bigger leg up over any potential competition than things like whether or not you completely min-max your character stats versus just completely winging it.
Hey.
Also, please don't self-promote in the Let's Play subreddit outside of the dedicated Feedback Friday threads and that sort of thing. That's a really easy way to get banned. Anyway, that's that. Here's to another 10 years, I guess. I don't even know if society's gonna make it another 10 years. Thank you to everyone who's dropped by at any point, past, present, or future. It has definitely been a wild ride. I hope you all enjoyed that, and I will see you all later.